Today I've got 3 soft drink bottles, and what I'm going to do is turn them into a musical instrument. What do I mean by that? Well, take a look. When you blow over top of a pop bottle, it makes a sound. And depending on how much liquid you have in there, it will make the sound a higher pitch or a lower pitch. Okay, so I've put labels for each of them to tell me how much I'm going to put in the bottles. But there's a problem. Some of them are in decimals, and some of them are in mixed fractions. How do I know what order to put them in? I want to have the lowest amount on one side and the highest amount on the other side, just like a piano. But I don't know how to do that if some of them are mixed fractions and some of them are decimals. I better figure that out before I make my musical instrument.
We already know how to sort mixed fractions in terms of smallest to largest. Here's an example over here, and what we know is that if we're taking a look at the 3 fractions, we can see that the 2 and 4/10 is the largest, so it's probably going to go to the right. And then we have 2 other numbers that start with 1. So there's 1 and 7/10 and 1 and 9/10. So 1 is the same, so we just look at the tenths, and we see, 7/10 is less than 9/10. So the switch would look something like that. 1 and 7/10, 1 and 9/10, 2 and 4/10. That part's easy. What we don't know how to do yet is how to make the sort if there are some decimals and some fractions. Something like this, right? We have 2 and 4/10, 2.3, 3.7. How do I know how to arrange it from smallest to largest? Not quite as easy. One way that we could tackle this is to try and turn everything into mixed fractions. 2 and 4/10 is already a mixed fraction. Can we turn 2.3 into a mixed fraction? Sure. Remember that the decimal point tells us where the parts are and where the wholes are. So 2 wholes, so we'll just turn that into 2. And then that's the parts. So let's turn 0.3 into tenths. 3 is in the tenths place, so this is going to be 3/10. And then we can do the same with 3.7. The wholes are on the left. 3 turns into 3. And then the parts are on the right of the decimal point. That's 7 in the tenths place, so that becomes 7/10. And now it's easier to rearrange. We know that 2.3 is the same as 2 and 3/10. We know that 3.7 is the same as 3 and 7/10. And we can go, 3 and 7/10 is the highest. And then we have 2 and 3/10 and 2 and 4/10. Well, 2 and 3/10 is less, so we do a little bit of a switcheroo. And now we've put them in order. Now I want you to try. I've given you 4 different sets of decimals or fractions. And what I want you to do for each of them is to convert the decimals into fractions. And then once they're all in fraction form, you can organize them from smallest to largest. Press pause to try it out. Press play to check your answers. Okay, let's check your answers. Starting on the top left, we have 0.8, 0.4, and 7/10. So 0.8, well, that just means an 8 in the tenths place, so 8/10. 0.4, well, that just means 4 in the tenths place, so 4/10. And now we have 8/10, 4/10, and 7/10. That's easy to arrange. 4/10 is the lowest, 8/10 is the highest. Whoop. And now we've sorted it from smallest to largest. What about 1.7, 0.9, and 1 and 3/10? Let's start with 1.7. Well, we've got wholes and parts. The 1 is just going to turn into 1, and then the 7 is in the tenths place, so 7/10. 1 and 7/10. 0.9, well, there's just a 9 in the tenths place, so 9/10. And then 1 and 3/10 stays the same. Okay, now everything's in fractions and we can sort it. 9/10 is clearly the smallest. 1 and 7/10 is the largest, and 1 and 3/10 is in the middle, so switcheroo. There we go. In the bottom left, we have 8.4, 5 and 6/10, and 7.7. What does 8.4 mean? Well, there's wholes and parts. 8 becomes 8, and 4 is in the tenths place, so it becomes 4/10. 8 and 4/10. What about 7.7? That's 7 and 7 tenths. So write it as 7 and 7 tenths. Now what? Well, 8 and 4 tenths is the largest, and 5 and 6 tenths is the smallest, and then 7 and 7 tenths goes in the middle. So, whoop, there we go, switcheroo. Finally, 3.7. Well, 3.7 is the same as 3 and 7 tenths, so write it like a fraction. 3.9 is the same as 3 and 9 tenths, so write it as a fraction. And 3 and 3 tenths is already like that. Now what? Well, they all start with 3 wholes, but then they have different fraction amounts. 3 tenths is the smallest fraction amount, so we'll put that on the furthest left. And everything else shifts over. And now it's in order from smallest to largest. Okay. Now, one thing that I noticed in your previous assignments is a mistake that a lot of people made. They said something like 0.10 is larger than 0.9 because 10 is larger than 9. What's the mistake? The mistake is that you're not thinking about what those digits represent. This is not 10, this is 1 in the tenths place. This is 9 in the tenths place. 9 is more than 1. So 9 tenths is more than 1 tenth. We can ignore the 0 because 0 means nothing. Or alternatively, you could put another 0 over here. What do I mean? Let's start with reading hundredths, because when we're looking at that 0.10, that 0 there is in the hundredths place. So how would you read these numbers? This would be 73 hundredths. This would be 41 hundredths. This would be 62 hundredths. This would be 58 hundredths. So far, so good. Now we need to remember how to say which number is greater when we're looking at hundredths. So, I think you can do this on your own. Which number is greater? I want you to write down for each of the pairs which of the two numbers is a greater number. Press pause to try it out. Press play to check your answers. Okay, I'm pretty sure you can do this, no problem. In the top left, 0.73. Oh, I shouldn't say it as 0.73. Let's say it as hundredths. So 73 hundredths or 68 hundredths. Well, 73 hundredths is more. In the top right, 95 hundredths or 99 hundredths. Well, 99 hundredths is more. In the bottom left, 35 hundredths or 42 hundredths. Well, 42 hundredths is more. 58 hundredths or 57 hundredths. 58 is more than 57, so 58 hundredths is more. Now, we need to get to the point where we can compare tenths and hundredths. So, here's a question for you. How many hundredths are in each of these numbers? Well, one way that you could think about this is you can extend each of these numbers into the hundredths place. How would you do that? Just stick in a 0. Why? Because this means 4 tenths. 0.40 means 4 tenths and 0 hundredths. But it also means 40 hundredths. And now you know the answer, right? There are 40 hundredths in this number. Same over here. This means 6 tenths. This would mean 6 tenths and 0 hundredths. Same thing because 0 means nothing. But you can also say this as 60 hundredths. 0.5 is the same as 0.50, which is the same as 50 hundredths. 0.7 is the same as 0.70, which is the same as 70 hundredths. So, if we're comparing 10 and hundredths, it's helpful to be able to turn the tenths into hundredths so that we can compare on the same basis. What would that look like? Something like this. As you can see, in each comparison, you have one number that's represented in tenths and one number that's represented in hundredths. What I want you to do is convert the tenths into hundredths, and then you can compare them on an equal basis. Then, circle which one is greater. Press pause to try it out. Press play to check your answers. Okay, let's check your answers. In the top right, 0.48 or 0.5. Well, we can turn that into 48 hundredths or 50 hundredths. Well, 50 hundredths is more, clearly. In the top right, 0.71 or 0.6. Well, we can stick a 0 at the end of 0.6, and now we're saying 71 hundredths or 60 hundredths. 71 hundredths is more. In the bottom left, 0.73 or 0.9. Well, 0.9 is the same as 0.90, and now we can say 73 hundredths or 90 hundredths. 90 hundredths is more. And finally, in the bottom right, 0.2 or 0.17. Well, 0.2 is the same as 0.20, and now we can say 20 hundredths or 17 hundredths. 20 hundredths is more. Does that make sense? If we make sure that each decimal has the same number of digits, it's easier to compare them. What about comparing fractions of different denominators? Here we have 2 boxes filled with Hawaiian Island punch. Well, it's not quite full, it's almost there. And if you take a look on the left-hand side, it's 9/10ths full. It's broken up into 10 pieces, and 9 of them are filled in, so 9/10ths. And on the right, it is 90 hundredths full. It's broken up into 100 pieces, and 90 of them are full of island punch. How could you turn 9/10ths into a decimal? Well, you would write it as 9 in the 10th place, and it would look something like that. 0.9 with 9 in the 10th place. And how would you write 90 hundredths as a decimal? Well, you'd have 90 extending into the hundredths place, and it would look something like that, 0.90. Are all of these the same? Yes, they're all equivalent. 9/10ths is the same as 90 hundredths, and if you want to talk about this in terms of multiplication, you're multiplying the numerator and the denominator both by 10, or you can think of it as sticking a 0 on the numerator and the denominator. And then 0.9 is the same as 0.90. Again, you're just sticking a 0 at the end. They're all equivalent. And that's going to be useful because if you're trying to sort numbers and some of them are fractions and some of them are decimals and some of them are tenths and some of them are hundredths, it can be useful to convert them all into the same form. So, here are some examples. What I want you to do is to convert all of them into the same form and then sort them from smallest to largest. My recommendation is to convert them all into fractions with 100 as the denominator. That's how I'm going to show you the answers after you check your answers. So, convert each of these into fractions with 100 as the denominator, and then for each set, sort them from smallest to largest. Press pause to try it out. Press play to check your answers. Answer checking time. Starting in the top left, we have 3/10ths. Well, 3/10ths is the same as 30 hundredths. We have 7/10ths. Well, 7/10ths is the same as 70 hundredths. And we have 48 hundredths. Well, 48 hundredths is the same as 48 hundredths. Okay, now that we've converted them all into fractions, we can see that 48 hundredths is less than 70 hundredths. So let's do a bit of a switcheroo. There we go. Now they're in order. In the top right, we've got 0.39. Well, 0.39 is the same as 39 hundredths. So let's write that. 39 hundredths. 4/10ths is the same as 40 hundredths. And then 38 hundredths is already in hundredths, so we don't need to convert it at all. Now, which one goes first? Which one goes second? Which one goes third? 40 hundredths is more than 38 hundredths or 39 hundredths, and 38 hundredths looks like the smallest one, so let's just move that over here and shift everything else over. There we go. In the middle on the bottom, we've got 2 and 17 hundredths, and that's going to stay the same. And then next we have 2 and 3/10ths. We need to turn that into a denominator of 100. So how do we do that? The 2 is going to stay the same. And the 3/10ths is going to turn into 30 hundredths. And then finally, 2.2. Well, that's the same as 2 and 2/10ths, which is the same as 2 and 20 hundredths. Okay, now we're ready to organize them. 17 hundredths is the smallest, but then we've got 20 hundredths versus 30 hundredths. 20 hundredths is smaller than 30 hundredths, so switcheroo, and now they're in order.
Now that I know to convert everything into the same form before I sort, I've done the same thing in my bottles here. I've turned 0.5 into 50 hundredths, and I've turned 1 5/10 into 1 50 hundredths. Now I just need to rearrange them. I think 1 50 hundredths is more than 1 25 hundredths. And now I've sorted them in order from lowest to greatest. Let's check it out. I'm going to fill them up and see if I've sorted them properly in order. Starting with 50 hundredths. That's 50 hundredths of a liter. Next, 1 25 hundredths. One 25 hundredths of a liter. And finally, 1 50 hundredths. Okay, I think I've definitely sorted them in order from lowest to highest. And what would they sound like? Let's find out. Yep, that's definitely the right order. Now what do I want you to do? I want you to finish page 231 in your Jump Math book, and then complete the quiz, which pops up later. Enjoy your math. I'm going to play some music.